Imagine this. You're sitting in a crowded Italian restaurant in Brooklyn. It's your 30th birthday. The lights are dim, candles flicker on small tables crammed close together, and the chatter of other diners fills the air. You've spent the whole day telling yourself, this year will feel different. Maybe this time your family will finally see you. Maybe they'll treat you the way you've been treating them for years. But when the waiter drops off the check, it slides directly toward you, not toward your mother, not toward your younger brother Ethan, straight to you, and you know the drill. You reach for your wallet, even though it's your night. You pay, because that's what you always do. Have you ever been humiliated on your own birthday? That's exactly how I felt. My mother sat across from me, glowing with pride every time Ethan ordered another expensive dish. He picked the priciest steak on the menu, added 2 glasses of red wine, and smirked like he was the guest of honor. I sat there, nibbling at a plate of pasta I didn't even want, doing the math in my head as the bill climbed higher and higher. And then came the cake. I had brought it myself. A modest cake from a bakery around the corner, nothing fancy, just something I could afford after paying rent and Ethan's endless expenses. The waiter set it down, lit the candles, and everyone sang. For a brief second, I let myself believe maybe this was enough. Maybe this was love. Then my mother leaned in close. Her voice was soft, but the words cut like glass. You're jealous of your brother. On my birthday. Over the cake I had bought. Those 5 words landed harder than any slap. I froze. The song ended. Ethan laughed, and I smiled a fake smile, but inside, something cracked. All the years of being the one who paid, who bailed him out, who covered for his mistakes. It all pressed down on me in that moment. I felt the air rush out of the room. You know that sinking feeling when someone exposes the truth you've been trying to bury? That was me. I thought back to college, when I skipped trips because Ethan needed money for textbooks. To the Christmas when I gave up buying myself a winter coat so he could get the new phone he wanted. To every loan that was never paid back. Every time Mom brushed it off with, he's younger, he needs help. And here I was, 30 years old, being told I was jealous of the very person I'd been carrying on my back. Something inside me snapped. I looked at Ethan, at the smug grin on his face, wine glass raised in celebration, and I felt a rush of anger I couldn't swallow anymore. I looked at my mother, her hand on his shoulder like he was the golden child, and I thought, enough. I didn't say it out loud just yet, but in my head I was screaming, if he's so special, let him pay his own damn bills. The rest of dinner passed in a blur. The laughter around me sounded hollow. Every bite of food felt heavy. I nodded at the jokes, smiled for the pictures, but I was done pretending. When the bill arrived again, Ethan didn't reach for it. Mom didn't even glance at it. It was expected, automatic. Olivia pays. I slid my card across the table, my hand steady but my chest burning. Do you know what it feels like to be invisible in your own story? To be the one making sacrifices, only to be painted as bitter, jealous, small? That night, I understood humiliation in its purest form. As I walked home through the cold Brooklyn streets, the city lights blurred by tears, one thought repeated in my mind. This ends here. Because birthdays are supposed to remind you that you're loved. Mine reminded me that I was being used, and I was done being used. I got home that night still burning from what my mother had whispered. Her words echoed in my ears long after I kicked off my shoes and dropped my purse by the couch. My apartment was quiet, just the hum of the refrigerator and the muffled sounds of Brooklyn traffic outside my window. I sat down, pulled out my laptop, and stared at the blank spreadsheet on the screen. Something inside me snapped open, and I knew I had to face the truth. I started typing. At first, I thought it would just be a rough estimate. Rent payments here and there, maybe a few hundred for utilities, some gas money. But as I scrolled through my bank statements, the numbers told a different story. I listed each category one by one. Rent for Ethan's studio, $1,600 a month. Car payments, $450 a month. Car insurance, $120. Gym membership Ethan swore he'd cancel, $60. His credit card minimums, $200. Groceries I picked up just until he got back on his feet. Easily $300 a month. Line after line filled the sheet, green cells turning into red as I added them up. My chest got tighter with each total. Do you know what it feels like to see your sacrifices in black and white? It's not just numbers, it's weekends you skip dinner out with friends. It's vacations you never booked. It's nights lying awake, trying to figure out how to stretch your paycheck one more time. By the time I scrolled to the bottom, the figure glared back at me. $35,000 in 1 year. I leaned back in my chair, the air gone from my lungs. That's a down payment on a home. That's a master's degree. That's freedom. And instead, it all went to patching holes in my brother's life. For years, I'd told myself, it's family, this is what you do. But sitting there in the glow of my laptop, I realized what I was doing wasn't helping. It was enabling. And the worst part? Nobody even said thank you. Do you know that hollow ache when you realize people you love don't even see the weight you're carrying? That was me. Staring at the spreadsheet, hands shaking, I opened my email. My fingers hovered above the keys, but I didn't second-guess myself this time. I wrote one message to Ethan, one message to my mom. It was short, sharp, and final. I can't keep doing this. From today on, I will no longer be covering Ethan's expenses. He has to handle his own bills. I hit send. No drafts, no rewrites, no hesitation. The whoosh of the email flying out felt like the first breath of fresh air I'd taken in years. For a moment, I just sat there, listening to the city outside, the honk of a horn, the bark of a dog. Brooklyn kept moving, indifferent to my decision. But inside my apartment, it felt like the world had shifted. I thought about all the times I said no to myself so I could say yes to Ethan. The coat I didn't buy last winter, the dentist appointment I kept rescheduling, the nights I stayed home eating noodles while he went out with friends. I thought about my mom's voice calling me jealous, when in reality, I had been the one funding his lifestyle. And in that quiet room, I made a promise. Never again. I wish I could tell you I felt triumphant, but the truth? I felt hollow and scared, because I knew what was coming. I knew my mom wouldn't take it lightly. I knew Ethan would explode, and I knew the whole family would try to drag me back into that role. But still, I closed my laptop with a strange kind of peace. The line had finally been drawn, so let me ask you, have you ever looked at your bank account and realized your generosity was bankrupting you? Because that night, with $35,000 staring me in the face, I realized generosity without boundaries isn't kindness. It's self-destruction, and I was done destroying myself. The emails I sent weren't just words, they were sparks. And like sparks in a dry forest, they lit up something I had been dreading but expecting all along. My mom didn't respond right away, neither did Ethan. But 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a text from her. "Dinner at Aunt Marie's this Sunday. We need to talk." I already knew what it meant. This wasn't going to be just a family dinner. This was going to be a tribunal, a trial, with me in the hot seat. When I walked into Aunt Marie's dining room that Sunday, the air was thick before we even sat down. The long table was set like a courtroom, candles flickering, food untouched. My aunts, uncles, cousins, all there, like jurors waiting for testimony. And at the head of the table sat my mother, her hand on Ethan's shoulder like he was the fragile one, the victim in all of this. I sat across from them, my stomach twisted, but I kept my face calm. I wasn't going to crumble. It started softly. My mom cleared her throat, voice dripping with disappointment. Olivia, family means helping each other. Ethan is struggling. You know that. Cutting him off so suddenly, it's cruel. Cruel. That word stung, as if I hadn't given years of my life to making sure Ethan could coast, as if $35,000 hadn't already been ripped out of my pocket. I looked around the table. My Uncle Paul chimed in. You've always been so responsible, Olivia. Can't you just help your brother a little longer? You're in a better position than he is. And Ethan sat there silent, eyes on his plate, shoulders hunched like he was a child again. No apology, no accountability, just waiting for me to fold under the pressure. Have you ever been in a room where everyone is against you, and the one person who owes you everything can't even look you in the eye? That was me. Right there, I let them talk. I let them guilt me. I let every sentence wash over me until it was almost unbearable. And then I pulled out my laptop. Do you want to see what helping looks like? I asked. My voice shook, but not with fear, with fury I had finally stopped swallowing. I turned the screen toward them. The spreadsheet glowed in the dim light, line after line of expenses, rent, car payments, credit cards, groceries, gym fees. Every single dollar Ethan had drained from me. Gasps filled the room. A murmur spread across the table. Aunt Marie leaned closer, squinting. 35,000? Yes, I said. That's what I paid for him in 1 year. And you're calling me cruel? The silence that followed was deafening. Ethan's face went pale. My mom's lips pressed into a thin line. Her hand tightening on his shoulder, I pressed on. Do you know what $35,000 could have done for me? A down payment on my own place, a future. But instead, it kept Ethan afloat while he refused to grow up. And now you want me to keep doing it? No, I'm done. Nobody laughed. Nobody smiled. The mood in the room shifted like a tide pulling back, exposing the sharp rocks underneath. For once, the spotlight wasn't on Ethan. It was on me, but not in the way they expected. I wasn't the jealous sister. I wasn't the bitter one. I was the only one holding up the mirror. Ethan shifted in his seat. Finally, he spoke. So, what am I supposed to do then? His voice was small, almost childlike, but I wasn't falling for it anymore. Figure it out, I said simply, the way the rest of us do, and that was it. The trial ended without a verdict because the evidence was undeniable. The jurors had no choice but to sit in silence, confronted with the truth they hadn't wanted to see. The fallout came fast. Ethan lost his apartment within the month. His car was repossessed. The credit cards shut down. For the first time in his life, he had to face reality without me as his safety net. And me? For the first time in mine, I felt a strange sense of justice. Painful, yes, lonely, absolutely, but necessary. So let me ask you, how many of you have been put on trial by your own family just for saying no? How many of you have had to defend your boundaries like a case in court? Because that Sunday dinner wasn't just a meal, it was a courtroom. And I walked out knowing I had finally won my own case. 1 year can change everything. I remember standing in the doorway of my new apartment in Queens, keys still warm in my hand, and thinking, this is mine. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't signing someone else's lease, or co-signing a loan, or pouring my paycheck into a pit that never filled. The walls were bare, the rooms still echoing, but every square foot felt like victory. The place wasn't big, just a modest 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a walk-up, but to me, it was a castle. Sunlight streamed through the living room windows, casting long stripes across the hardwood floor. I could hear the distant rumble of the 7 train, and instead of feeling annoyed, I smiled. It meant I had roots. I had chosen this. I spent weeks painting, unpacking, arranging. My savings had been stretched to the limit for the down payment, but I didn't care. Every box I opened was proof that I had clawed my way here. And slowly, Piece by piece, it stopped feeling like a dream and started feeling like home. By the time my housewarming rolled around, I wasn't nervous anymore. I was proud. I laid out snacks, lit candles, played music that made the space feel alive. Friends came first, bringing bottles of wine and laughter. They hugged me tight, saying how much I deserved this. Their words were like salve on an old wound. And then my family arrived. I braced myself, but something had shifted. Ethan walked in quietly, no entourage, no swagger. He wore a simple button-down and carried a store-bought cake. He had started working an entry-level job a few months back, and for once, he wasn't asking for anything. He just said, "Congrats, Liv." His voice cracked a little, and for a moment, I saw not the boy who drained me dry, but the man he might become. My mom followed, her eyes scanning the apartment, her expression hard to read. She complimented the paint color, asked about the neighborhood. She didn't apologize. She probably never would. But she didn't undermine me either. That silence, that lack of resistance, was its own kind of peace offering. The evening unfolded gently. We ate, we talked, we laughed in cautious bursts. It wasn't perfect. Old wounds don't vanish overnight. But as I stood there with a glass in my hand, watching people I loved fill the space I had built, I realized something. The balance was finally tilting. Not in my favor, not against me, just toward something steadier. There was no boardroom trial this time, no accusations, just the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, the faint buzz of hope. I caught Ethan later, standing by the window. "It's nice," he said, nodding at the apartment. "I guess I gotta figure out how to get something like this too." I didn't lecture him. I didn't offer to help. I just smiled and said, "Yeah, you do." Have you ever felt that strange mix of relief and pride when the storm finally calms, even if scars remain? That's what that night was. The closure wasn't flashy. It wasn't a mic drop moment. It was quieter, but just as powerful. It was me living in a space I earned, surrounded by people who were slowly learning to respect the boundaries I had fought so hard to build. And maybe, just maybe, it was the start of something new. For all of us. It started with an envelope. Thin, white, ordinary, the kind you almost toss onto the counter without a second glance. But the bold black print on the corner, my name, my address, pulled me in. I slid it open with my finger, expecting junk mail or maybe a credit card offer. What I found instead made my stomach drop, a notice. Cold, official language. Past due balance. Immediate action required. At first, I thought it was some mistake. I had been careful. After a year of scraping and saving, I was finally steady. My bills were paid on time. My credit card balances were low, my mortgage auto-drafted. So why was a bank demanding thousands of dollars from me? I read it again, then again. The loan wasn't mine. Or, at least, it shouldn't have been. The letter said I was listed as the guarantor for a personal loan, tens of thousands of dollars, a loan taken out less than 6 months ago. My heart raced as I scanned the details. The borrower's name sat there plain as day. Ethan. I felt the blood drain from my face. My hands shook. It was impossible. I never signed for any loan. I never even knew about it. I dropped into a chair, the letter crumpled in my fist. How could this have happened? My mind spun through possibilities. A clerical error? Identity theft? And then, like a knife turning, a thought I didn't want to face. Mom. I could hear her voice in my head, the same voice that whispered over my birthday cake. "You're jealous of your brother." The same voice that had begged, demanded, rationalized for years why I had to sacrifice so Ethan could thrive. Would she really go this far? I wanted to dismiss it, but my gut knew. She had always insisted Ethan just needed a little more time, a little more help. She had always acted like my resources were family resources. Why would a signature stop her? I pulled out the loan documents from the envelope. There it was, my name, my signature, scribbled across the bottom. Except it wasn't mine. The letters were sloppy, the loops wrong. Someone had forged me, and suddenly, everything made sense. The fury that shot through me was different from the quiet bitterness of the past. This wasn't about paying someone's rent or credit card bill. This was fraud. This was my credit, my legal standing, my future. This wasn't just unfair. It was dangerous. I could lose everything I'd worked for. My home, my stability. The fragile independence I had built could collapse under a debt I never agreed to. Have you ever had that moment where your body goes ice cold, like your brain is trying to protect you from the shock? That's how it felt. I sat there, staring at the papers, not moving, barely breathing. And then the anger kicked in. Because here's the truth. Betrayal from strangers hurts, but betrayal from your own family cuts in ways you can't describe. I flashed back to the nights I stayed up late, paying Ethan's bills. The way I handed over my credit card when Mom said he just needed gas money. The countless times I swallowed my pride while they accused me of being selfish. All those sacrifices, and now this? A forged signature tying me to a mountain of debt? I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive straight to Mom's house and throw the letter on her kitchen table. But instead, I sat down and forced myself to think. If I reacted in anger, I might make it worse. This wasn't just a family fight anymore. This was legal. I needed proof. I needed to be smart. I spread out the papers on the table, snapping photos with my phone. I highlighted the mismatched handwriting, the dates, the absurdity of it all. My hands still trembled, but I knew what this meant. I was going to have to confront her. But before that, I had to face myself, because part of me still wanted to deny it, to believe there was some other explanation. I mean, who wants to believe their own mother would forge their name on a loan? I stood by the window, clutching the letter, and asked myself out loud, "What would you do if your mom betrayed you like this?" Silence answered back, just the hum of the city outside. I realized then that the stakes had shifted. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about truth, boundaries, and whether I was willing to let them keep stealing from me, piece by piece, until nothing was left. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't just tired. I was ready to fight. Have you ever discovered a betrayal so sharp it made you rethink everything you thought you knew about family? If you've ever been there, you know exactly how that letter felt in my hands. I held on to that letter for 3 nights before I said a word. 3 nights of staring at the ceiling, listening to the radiator hiss in my queen's apartment, rehearsing the words I thought I'd never have to say. You think you're strong until you're forced to call out your own mother. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I asked Mom and Ethan to meet me at her house on a Sunday evening. The same house I grew up in, the same kitchen table where I did homework, the same walls that held birthday banners for Ethan when I was the one footing the bill. When I walked in, Mom was setting down a plate of lasagna like nothing was wrong. Ethan was hunched over his phone, scrolling, his face lit by the blue glow of the screen. I sat down, the envelope heavy in my bag. "Olivia," Mom said with that warm tone. "You've been so distant lately. We were worried." I didn't answer. I slid the papers onto the table. The room went still. "What's this?" she asked, her voice quick, sharp. "You tell me," I said. My voice was calmer than I felt. "A loan in Ethan's name. My name is guarantor, my signature forged." Ethan finally looked up, his eyes wide, but his mouth stayed shut. Mom's face didn't even flinch. She glanced at the papers, then back at me. "Family helps family. Sometimes sacrifices have to be made. You wouldn't let your brother sink, would you?" I laughed, bitter, sharp. "Sink? He's been sinking for years. I've been the life raft." And now you're telling me fraud is just family teamwork? Her jaw tightened. Don't be dramatic. The bank just needs time. We'll figure it out. No, I said. I'll figure it out, because this isn't about rent or groceries anymore. This is my legal record. This is my future. For a second, silence stretched so long I thought maybe the walls themselves were listening. Ethan stared at the table, his thumbs twitching like he wanted to type, but didn't know what to say. Ethan, I snapped, did you know? He hesitated, then shrugged. Cowardly, small. Mom said it was just paperwork. She said you'd understand. That was it. The final knife twist. Not only did Mom betray me, but she dragged Ethan into it, feeding him the same old line. Olivia will fix it. I pushed the papers closer. Look at the signature. Look closely. Does it look like me? Because it isn't. Mom's face flickered. For the first time, I saw it. The crack in her confidence. She leaned in, squinting at the loop of the O, the crooked line of the V. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to the screenshots I had saved. Here's the kicker. I spoke to the bank. They sent me digital records. They verified the signature was submitted through a scanned upload. And guess what? The IP address tracks back to this house. Quote, the color drained from her cheeks. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. That silence? It was louder than any argument we had ever had. Family has to share the burden, she whispered finally, but her voice cracked. Family doesn't forge each other's names, I shot back. Family doesn't risk each other's lives for convenience. And then, for the first time, the weight of it landed. The people who raised me, who should have protected me, had turned me into a shield, and I had let them until now. I leaned forward, my palms pressed flat against the table. You need to hear me. I'm done being the solution. I'm done being the safety net. Whatever happens next is on you, not me. Ethan shifted in his seat, muttering, So what now? They'll take the car? I turned to him. They'll take more than that. And maybe it's time you finally learn what that feels like. Mom gasped, clutching her chest like I'd stabbed her. But I wasn't the one holding the knife. She was. She always had been. The twist wasn't just the forged papers. The twist was the moment the truth sat naked on that table. And no one, not Ethan, not Mom, not the extended family who had always backed them, could deny it anymore. I picked up the letter, slid it back into the envelope, and stood. This ends here. I'll protect myself. If you want to explain to the bank, go ahead. But you won't be using my name again. The air was thick, choking. No one argued. No one defended. The silence of guilt filled the room, and I walked out, the envelope pressed to my chest, shaking but steady. Because sometimes the scariest part isn't the confrontation. It's realizing you've finally stopped being afraid to lose people who never thought twice about losing you. What would you do if your own mother forged your name? The Monday after that confrontation, I walked into a law office in downtown Manhattan with the envelope still tucked in my bag. I remember the hum of the elevator, the sterile smell of carpet cleaner, the way my heart was pounding like I was walking into court even though it was just a consultation. But for me, it was more than that. It was my life on the line. The lawyer, a sharp woman in her 40s named Denise, flipped through the documents. Her nails clicked softly on the table as she turned each page. Olivia, she said finally, looking me dead in the eyes, you've been the victim of fraud. You don't have to carry this, and you shouldn't. Hearing those words, it was like someone cracked open a window in a suffocating room. For the first time in months, I could breathe. We filed the paperwork. Step by step, Denise explained how the forged signature, the bank's digital logs, even Ethan's admission, it all worked in my favor. Legally, I had the right to detach myself from the debt. The process would take weeks, maybe months, but the direction was clear. And when the official notice came, that moment is burned into me, a letter, this time addressed correctly, stating that I was no longer responsible. The debt was Ethan's, entirely his. I sat on my couch, the paper trembling in my hands, sunlight spilling across my living room. Relief washed over me like a tide. But it wasn't just relief, it was empowerment. For so long, I thought boundaries would make me the villain in my own family story, but here I was, finally free, and the world didn't collapse. Ethan had to sell the car. He had to move into a tiny studio he paid for himself. For once, he wasn't shielded by my credit card, my savings, or my signature. It wasn't easy for him, I know that. But you can't learn to swim if someone always keeps you strapped into a life vest. And Mom? She didn't speak to me for weeks. When she finally called, her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard. "Olivia," she said. I didn't realize how far I'd gone. I thought I was protecting him. Protecting him? I almost laughed, but there was no venom left in me, only tired honesty. "Mom, you weren't protecting him. You were disabling him. And you were destroying me in the process." Silence hung on the line. Then softly she said, "I'm sorry." It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't erase the years of imbalance, the favoritism, the constant bleeding of my resources. But it was a start. And in that moment, I realized I didn't need her to rewrite history. I just needed her to stop writing checks with my name. The housewarming party I threw for myself in Queens a year earlier had felt like a milestone. But this was the real victory. Not just buying a home, not just saying no to bills that weren't mine, but taking back my identity, my legal autonomy, my dignity. For the first time in forever, I felt untouchable. Not because nothing could hurt me, but because I knew I had the courage to protect myself. Here's what I've learned. Setting boundaries with family isn't cruelty, it's clarity. It's choosing not to sink with people who refuse to swim. It's choosing to survive, to grow, to live on your own terms. And maybe you've been there too. Maybe you've had to say no when everyone expected you to say yes. Maybe you've been called selfish for saving yourself. Let me tell you, you are not selfish. You are sane. I stood at my window that night, looking out at the lights of the city, holding that letter of freedom in my hand. And I whispered to myself, not out of anger, not out of spite, but with a calm strength I didn't know I had. Never again. Never again would I sign my name to someone else's mistakes. Never again would I let loyalty become a leash. Never again would I be told that love means losing myself. And to you, watching this right now, maybe you're wondering if you're allowed to draw that line. Maybe you're wondering if you'll lose everything if you finally say enough. I'm living proof. What you'll lose are the chains. What you'll gain is your life. So let me ask you, have you ever had to set boundaries with family? And if you did, how did it change you? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to hear it, because we're not alone. And sometimes, knowing someone else broke free is all it takes to believe that you can too. I thought the storm had ended when the judge finally signed off, when the papers cleared my name from Ethan's loan, and when I walked out of that courtroom knowing my mother could never legally bind me again. But what nobody tells you is this. Family drama never stays inside the walls of your home. It leaks. It drips into the cracks of your friendships, your workplace, your neighborhood. And that was the next wave I wasn't ready for. At first, it was whispers. You know the type. Half smiles that don't reach the eyes. Questions loaded with gossip instead of care. I'd walk into my local coffee shop, the one I'd been going to for years, and feel the barista pause just a second too long when asking, "How are you today?" I couldn't prove it, but I felt it. Like my private war had turned into public entertainment. The real blow came one Saturday morning at the farmer's market. I was reaching for a basket of peaches when I overheard two older women chatting by the tomatoes. That's her, isn't it? The one who dragged her own family to court? They didn't even lower their voices. I froze. I wanted to shout that they didn't know the truth, that I hadn't dragged anyone anywhere, that I was the one dragged, but I couldn't move. I just picked the ripest peach I could find, smiled too wide, and walked away. Have you ever had people reduce your entire life to a headline they invented? That's what it felt like. Ungrateful daughter refuses to help brother. That's the headline I imagined above my head every time I stepped outside. At work, things weren't much better. I'd worked in my company for almost 6 years, and I knew the rhythm of office chatter. But suddenly, the rhythm changed. Conversations would halt when I entered the break room. Slack messages that once buzzed with inside jokes now felt stiff, professional, a little too polished. It was clear someone had been talking. I later learned a distant cousin of mine, someone I barely spoke to, was friendly with a coworker. One casual story over drinks had been enough to turn my private nightmare into workplace small talk. And yet, something unexpected happened in that same office. One afternoon, my colleague Marissa pulled me aside. She shut the door, looked at me with a softness I wasn't used to seeing anymore, and said, "I know what you're going through." My brother stole my identity once, took out credit cards in my name. My parents told me to let it go. For family's sake, I didn't. I fought, and I won. That conversation cracked something open inside me. Up until then, I thought I was walking around with a scarlet letter only I could see. But Marissa's words showed me I wasn't alone. There were other people, quietly fighting, quietly judged, quietly surviving, the exact same betrayals. Still, the weight of being that girl in my community didn't disappear overnight. Church on Sundays turned into a minefield. One woman cornered me after service and said, "Family is family, dear. You'll regret this when your mother's gone." I nodded, too exhausted to explain that family is also accountability. That being someone's daughter doesn't mean being someone's scapegoat. And then came the family barbecue. Extended relatives I hadn't seen in years came up with their sympathetic clucks and their probing questions. "So, is Ethan back on his feet yet? Did you really sue your own mom?" It didn't matter that neither was true. Ethan was barely scraping by on his own, and I hadn't sued anyone. I just refused to be legally tied to their mess. But people prefer a salacious story to a complicated truth. That night, I sat in my car afterward, hands gripping the steering wheel, and asked myself, when does this end? Is there ever a point where you stop being defined by the ugliest chapter of your life? Or do you carry it forever, like a scar everyone insists on staring at? Here's the pattern interrupt for me, and maybe for you too. The louder the gossip grew, the more I realized something. I wasn't ashamed of what I'd done. I was ashamed of being ashamed. Do you get what I mean? I kept wishing I could hide. But why should I? I had protected myself. I had told the truth. I had survived betrayal, and somehow I was letting whispers weigh more than facts. So I made a shift. I started telling my story openly, not to defend myself, but to own it. When a coworker made a sly comment, I'd answer calmly, "Yes, I cut off financial ties. I had no choice if I wanted to survive, and yes, I'm glad I did." When an aunt asked at a family gathering if I missed paying for Ethan's car, I'd laugh and say, "Not at all." My savings account is thriving, and you know what? Owning it took the oxygen out of the gossip. People crave secrecy, shame, hidden cracks. When you drag the whole thing into daylight, suddenly it's not juicy anymore, it's just real. But it wasn't just about silencing whispers. It was about rewriting the narrative for myself. I wasn't the daughter who abandoned family. I was the woman who finally said enough. And slowly, I noticed a shift, a different kind of whisper. One woman at church told me, "I admire your strength. I wish I had done the same with my sister." A neighbor slipped me a note that read, "Thank you for standing up. It helps people like me believe we can too. So here's where I leave you in this chapter. When your private battles spill into the public eye, it hurts. It feels unfair. It feels humiliating. But sometimes the very thing you fear, being exposed, becomes the thing that frees you. Because the moment you stop hiding, you stop giving other people the power to define you. And let me ask you this. If your family drama leaked out tomorrow, would you cower? Or would you own it, loud enough that the whispers lose their thrill? When the dust finally settled, when the lawyers were done, when the bills were sorted, when Ethan could no longer knock on my door expecting a bailout, I thought I'd feel nothing but relief, freedom, silence. But you know what surprised me most? The emptiness, the echo of what used to be family. I grew up believing family was this sacred circle, messy but safe, loud but loving. We fought, sure, but it was supposed to be the kind of fighting that ended with someone handing you a plate of food afterward. I never imagined family could also be betrayal written in ink, signed under your name, and stamped by a bank. In the weeks after the legal mess, I found myself replaying childhood moments like a broken film reel. My mother tucking me in, her voice low as she said, "I'll always protect you." My brother chasing me through sprinklers, both of us squealing, dripping wet, too young to know what resentment even meant. And then the jarring contrast. Those same people, years later, choosing convenience and entitlement over honesty, choosing silence instead of apology, choosing me as the solution to problems they created. So what does family even mean after that? For a while, I told myself it meant nothing. That blood is just blood. That family is a word people hide behind when they want loyalty without accountability. But slowly, almost against my will, I started to learn something else. It happened on a Tuesday night. My friend Grace showed up at my apartment with takeout Thai food. No occasion, no agenda. Just, I figured you hadn't eaten yet. We sat cross-legged on my living room floor, slurping noodles, laughing about nonsense, and somewhere in the middle of it, I realized, this felt more like family than anything I'd known in years. It was in little moments like that. Marissa from work texting me, "Want to grab coffee?" And really listening when I said I was tired of being judged. My neighbor, Mr. Rodriguez, helping me carry groceries up 3 flights of stairs, joking that he was my backup brother. Even strangers online, people who heard my story, sending messages like, "You're not alone. I went through this too." That's when the shift happened. I stopped measuring family by last names and started measuring it by actions. Family isn't who shares your DNA. It's who shows up when your world cracks. It's who stands by you when the whispers get loud. It's who doesn't ask you to break yourself in half to keep them whole. But here's the twist. Forgiveness, or at least something close to it, snuck in too. Not for the actions, not for the forged signature or the lies, but for the fact that people are flawed, desperate, and sometimes blind in ways that have nothing to do with you. My mother, in her own twisted logic, thought she was protecting Ethan by sacrificing me. It's not okay. It will never be okay, but I can understand the fear that drove her. Ethan wanted shortcuts because he never learned the value of standing on his own. That's not my burden anymore, but I can recognize it without letting it define me. And here's the lesson I want to leave with you. Sometimes you have to let go of the fantasy version of family to embrace the real one you build yourself. Maybe your family is your childhood friend who knows your coffee order by heart. Maybe it's the coworker who texts, "You made it through today, proud of you?" Maybe it's the neighbor who waters your plants when you're gone. I used to think losing my real family meant I'd be alone forever. But the truth is, I just cleared space for a better one, a chosen one. Have you ever thought about who your real family is? Not the one on paper, but the one that makes you feel safe, seen, and whole? If you're nodding right now, maybe you've already found them. Because here's the thing. The word family is not a debt you owe. It's not a contract written in guilt. It's a verb, a choice. And every day, you get to choose who belongs in that circle. And if nobody's told you lately, let me be the first. You deserve a family that doesn't hurt you to love you. After everything, the lawsuits, the shouting matches, the slammed doors, you'd think the loudest part of my life would have been the chaos. But no, the loudest part was the silence that came after. No more phone calls from my mom, her voice laced with guilt and manipulation. No more late-night knocks from Ethan, begging for another last favor. No group texts from relatives asking, "Can't you just help a little longer?" It was quiet. Too quiet. At first I hated it. The silence felt like abandonment. Like standing in an empty house after a storm, listening to the wind whistle through broken windows. I kept waiting for the phone to buzz, for someone to apologize, for someone, anyone, to say, "We see you, we were wrong." But days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and nothing came. You know what silence really does? It forces you to hear yourself. For years, my voice was drowned out by everyone else's needs, their emergencies, their expectations, their constant cries for more. And in that silence, I started to hear the questions I had buried. Why did I let it go on for so long? Why was I so afraid to say no? Why did I confuse sacrifice with love? The answers weren't easy. Sometimes I didn't want to face them, but the silence wouldn't let me run anymore. I remember sitting in my kitchen one morning, coffee gone cold, the city waking up outside my window. I thought about my mother's words, "You're jealous of your brother." That whisper had haunted me for years, but in the silence, I realized it wasn't truth. It was projection. It was her way of keeping me small, compliant, guilty, and I had carried that weight like it was mine. It wasn't. Silence stripped away the noise until all that was left was me, raw and real. And once I heard myself, I couldn't unhear it. I began to reclaim the words I'd lost. Strong, independent, worthy. But here's the twist. Silence didn't just expose pain. It also revealed possibility. Without their voices dictating my every move, I could finally imagine my own future. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. I wrote about dreams I had shelved, travel, maybe grad school, maybe even starting my own business. Ideas that never had space to breathe before. And I realized something else. Silence isn't empty. It's full. Full of choices. Full of chances to redefine yourself. Still, there were moments when the quiet broke me. Nights when loneliness hit hard, when I questioned if I had overreacted, if I should have just swallowed my pride and played the role of good daughter. But then I'd remember the forged signature, the lies, the crushing debt that almost wasn't mine, and I'd breathe through the doubt, reminding myself, silence is better than manipulation. Distance is better than betrayal. You might be wondering, did I ever reach out again? Did I pick up the phone, try to patch things up? The answer is no. And maybe that sounds cold, but sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not break the silence. Sometimes healing means letting the quiet speak louder than the noise ever did. So here's what I want to ask you. Have you ever sat in that kind of silence? The kind that's heavy, uncomfortable, but ultimately necessary? Did you come out stronger on the other side? If you have, you know what I mean. If you haven't, trust me. It's terrifying, but it's also where you finally meet yourself. And that's worth more than any forced version of family could ever give you.